Hey, that's what we need.
Like,
That's
what
what we
going on,
need.
boy? Yeah,
No
man.
doubt.
But yeah, let's hop right into it.
All right,
Hello,
cool.
hello, and welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode of Family Reflections. I'm joined today on the line with Mike Nixon again. You remember him from the last episode. If you watched that, if you haven't, it makes sense to check that out. It's still on the Ianola Pictures website at www.ianolapictures.com and on the Ianola Pictures Facebook. It was the beginning of this conversation on racism that we're having. And of course, even in this second episode, Mike, I don't think we could cover this entirely.
No, it's impossible.
Yeah, but
Uh-huh.
we're gonna try our best, right?
Sure,
We're
sure,
gonna
sure.
try our best. If this is your first time ever watching Family Reflections is a bi-weekly show where we just talk about uh, social issues, and we also talk about pretty much anything else we want to talk about on the Ianola Pictures platform. So yeah, we're just really glad to have Mike on the line. Mike, for the people who didn't watch the last episode, can you just give a quick introduction to yourself and what you do and so on?
Sure, sure. Well, Ketty, thanks again for having me on. It's good to be with you, bro. Thanks for having me on the platform. Michael Nixon, and I serve as the VP for Diversity and Inclusion here at Andes University, where we both went to school for
Right.
undergrad. And so, yeah, I moved a bit, but got pulled back. As we say, Marion Springs AU can be a bit of a black hole that kind of sucks you back in. And so, don't hold your breath, but you may end up back here one day, Ketty. You never know.
Hey man, my experience in Berrien wasn't that bad. So it kind
Cool.
of feels like a third home for me. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah,
Uh, I spent 5 years there, and it really kind of grows on you in a way. Some of your coming of age experiences are there, and some
sure,
of the
sure.
friendships I made there are friendships that have lasted the test of time. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and it's what you make it. Every place is what you make it, and so to your point, making life lasting, friendships and relationships and all that good stuff. So it's a great place. So anybody who's out there thinking about it, hit me up, send me a message. We can, I'll drop a little recruiting in there. We could let me know if you're interested, and we'll see if we can make it happen.
yes, sir. Yeah, let's do it.
Yep.
Um, just before we really dive into the conversation, I just wanted to share a story, right?
Sure.
This happened a few years into my work life, a few years into my career. I think the second, yeah, actually, sometime in 2016, right? I was stationed in Ohio. My company sent me from our Boston office to Ohio to help with a project, and I was, just being friendly. Everything was cool. I had a good time there. But there was one afternoon we were having a training session, and everybody's kind of seated at the lunch table, and we're all
Hmm.
talking. And just from my time there up till that point, I already knew that a lot of people there were more on the conservative end, more on the right. Uh, it hadn't really proven to be much of a problem, even though every once in a while you hear a remark here and there that's
Hmm.
uh, a little on the edge. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you do what you can, and we're at the lunch table, and this was during the election season.
Hmm.
At the time, it was Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton, and this lady just bust out into this rant saying, we need Trump in office because we got to get rid of all these Islamic terrorists and these Black Lives Matter people. And as soon as she said that, right, the entire table, I kid you not, the entire table just kind of looked at me.
Yeah.
Everybody just looking at me, expecting me
Yeah.
to, I don't know if they thought I would just blow up and start throwing the table over.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
but I was very conflicted, right? Because I was just very intrigued on why she was so angry about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
What was this thing about Black Lives Matter that led her to mention it in the same sentence as Islamic terrorists, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there's a lot of conversation about exactly the right way to say even that. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what made that so potent to her, right?
Right.
So I kind of want to know what you think about the level of opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement. Right now on social media, it's something that it seems to be a back and forth on social media, right? You
Yeah.
had even your Candace Owens saying that, you know, the whole thing, she said a lot of stuff.
Yeah. She always has a lot to say.
But what do you think about that?
I mean, interesting story. And I think, we all sort of have these stories of interacting mostly with non-Black people around this whole discussion around Black Lives Matter, right? And there's this old quote that says, when you are used to being in a privileged position and others are being oppressed, equality can feel like oppression. And so I think for a lot of people who are hearing the refrain, Black Lives Matter, number one, they don't understand the context within which that refrain is being offered, because from their perspective and from their worldview, there's this colorblind equality that they've all bought into. We've been taught, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and Martin Luther King, some 100 years later, said, "I have a dream," and everything's okay now. And we've been living in the dream ever since, because that's what history tells us is the truth, right? But that obviously is not the case. It hasn't been the case, categorically across the variety of different facets of everyday life. But in particular for non-Black persons, I mean, because that's the majority of folks that push back on Black Lives Matter. I mean, you'll have your Candace Owenses and maybe your Thomas Sowells and some other Black folks that are pushed forward by people behind the scenes to disseminate, white supremacist talking points. But in large part, it's due to the fact that, folks just really don't have the contextual experience for why it's necessary for us to declare that Black Lives Matter. And really, what's implied by the refrain is that Black Lives Matter as well. Black lives also matter. Black Lives Matter too. It's honestly, Black Lives Matter is an All Lives Matter chant, but, the All Lives Matter refrain has just been concocted to shut down the conversation that needs to be had around the lack of equity and the lack of, inclusion, oftentimes, of Black lives into what has been, in America in particular, a predominantly white and a predominantly white-dominated, both culturally and political power, and in every other facet of our country, that has led to us needing to declare, due to a variety of different inequities, that Black lives do matter. So I think that fragility around, for non-Black persons hearing that refrain is really mostly rooted in their experience, and also the way that they've been shaped and formed by, American society, because, in large part, the way that the American system has been sort of constructed is for white persons to have that very reaction to something like Black Lives Matter, because there are a lot of mythical tales we tell ourselves about our history in America, as opposed to getting down to the nitty-gritty and the truth. And I feel that if we did that and really reckoned and wrestled with that, a refrain like Black Lives Matter wouldn't be so difficult for your coworker and other non-Black persons to hear.
That's very well said. But I think there's another level to this too, right? Because I was listening. Sometimes I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, and I was listening to their conversation, and one of the guests mentioned that there is a socialist, or basically a socialist agenda, and he was basically saying that Black Lives Matter is a centralized organization that has an agenda behind the scenes. But I think myself and most people listening on this episode right now always thought that Black Lives Matter was sort of a decentralized trend that caught on in various locations across the country, and not so much an organization which has leadership or something like that, right?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of conversation about that, and that's something that's thrown around a lot. And it's interesting. I was scrolling through my phone just to get the exact message, but I actually got a message from someone this past Thursday. It's a person who is a fellow Christian, not Adventist, but a Christian, and someone who I attended a ministry with previously. And he asked me the question, Mike, as a brother in Christ, how are you supporting Black Lives Matter? Are you interested in doing an FB Live debate or informal conversation? And my response to him was, thanks for asking, but no, I'm not interested in a debate. And then he went into some of the refrains that you just shared. Have you read their mission statement? It's a sad state of affairs when Christians are aligning themselves to this kind of a movement. And so I literally get messages like that at least once a week from folks, particularly in the church. And, I think that there's a lot of confusion around, number one, the movement for Black Lives, which is more of a national network. And there, of course, were 3 Black women who really kicked off this movement in the wake of the Trayvon Martin killing by George Zimmerman.
Sure.
But it's really branched out from that. For example, not far from where Andrews University is, it was maybe like a week or two ago in 2019, so a year ago, when the Black Lives Matter organization began in South Bend, Indiana. That's about maybe 20 minutes from here. And it was in response to a police-involved shooting of an unarmed Black man in South Bend. And they organized themselves into a local chapter. And, there's an affiliation to Black Lives Matter, obviously, but they operate and function as their own local chapter in response to the local issues here in the South Bend region. So there isn't, some dictate to them from a national leader of this is what you need to do or this is what you can and can't do. There, of course, are some principles, on the, in the Movement for Black Lives website that people, I think, sometimes can get uncomfortable with. And that's really because, obviously this is not, the Movement for Black Lives. It's more of an umbrella organization, and there's lots of people involved in it from lots of different backgrounds. So not everyone is from the Christian faith. There are folks that I'm sure are atheist, agnostic, Muslim, whatever their religious background is. And so what I think they've strived to do is to just create a movement that does have some broad principles, because they do talk about things like, for example, equal rights for folks in the Black LGBTQ community. And I think that's one of the things that caused a lot of people to start talking about, all these conspiracies about how, there's this hidden agenda and they're trying to, take over the world and they want to kill police and all this different type of nonsense that, is proliferated on, on right-wing websites and outlets like Fox News and things of that nature, as opposed to looking at the broader perspective of Black Lives Matter, what we've just had in this current moment. Let's just talk about that. You had Black Lives Matter demonstrations in all 50 states and in multiple countries around the world. And that made this current moment the largest global civil rights movement in world history.
So even that, that's another question I had, or something I wanted to talk about. What was the thing that caused this moment to happen? I know there was injustice in the case of George Floyd. There's been injustice in all these, unfortunately, numerous instances. But what was the thing that caused this moment to be the spark that really spread across the entire planet? You know what I mean?
It's a good question, and I think that's been the question recently. Um, I do think that the pandemic had something to do with it. The fact that really, and it was also the culmination. Although we've had, these culminative moments before,
Right.
like when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were both killed in the same week. Um, it wasn't to this level, but there was a huge outcry, particularly in Texas, that led to some demonstrations. And there have been some moments of demonstration. And I do think the pandemic had something to do with it. The fact that
Everybody's
folks were
home.
quarantined, shut down,
Yeah.
home, all the different things that we would normally distract ourselves with. I mean, you would normally be in the middle of the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, off-season stuff with the NFL, baseball starting back. That's generally the time of the year where there's the most amount of sports entertainment happening.
Yeah.
And all the other different things that we connect with, whether it's work, school, whatever, graduations, all that stuff being shut down. And now just having come across your screen in a way that's unavoidable. I think the images in particular of the video of Ahmaud Arbery being killed on a jog, and then to just watch George Floyd be, choked to death with a police officer's knee, couched in between that, hearing the details about Breonna Taylor, who still has not gotten close to getting justice, and the officers who killed her have not been arrested. I think that it really caused the globe to really say, what in the world is going on here? I mean, again, it's not like that this is new. It's not
Right.
that the outcry hasn't happened before, but I think it happened in a way that was unavoidable, that I think really has, caused that tipping point, to where we're seeing, I mean, they have these demonstrations in countries where there's not a lot of black people. I mean, there was a Black Lives Matter march in Germany.
Right.
I mean, it's not, I mean, there's some black folk over there that have immigrated, but it's not a large amount. But they were in the thousands marching for Black lives. And
And
so, yeah.
that's something I find very interesting, because from my experience going visiting different countries, there always seems to be a level of empathy in let's say white people across the board in countries that are outside of the US, that surpasses those of individuals who actually live in the US. It always seems like people from outside the US bubble looking in always care much more deeply about the injustices that people are suffering inside of the bubble. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that that's something that hasn't been fully figured out. And why is that? Why is that the case?
So the question is, why are folks that are outside of the bubble
More
maybe
empathetic. Yep.
more empathetic, like this time around, as opposed to like previously,
I think
or
they've
just in
always been
general?
more. Yeah, just in general, they've always been more
Yeah.
empathetic. So
Yeah. So well, I'll say this. I think particularly across the globe, there's somewhat of a confusion. And it's not that there isn't, like, violence that happens in other parts of the world, that
right,
does. I mean,
right.
but oftentimes that violence is connected to some sort of war or just general government instability or whatever the case may be, like regime change or whatever. You'll have these seasons of that. But I think there's this confusion, because the majority of the world, law enforcement does not operate the same way that it does here. You know, in many countries, law enforcement is not even armed, and there's also a different relationship with the citizens of those countries and weapons and firearms. A lot of other places have much more stringent, you know, um, laws around access to those kinds of weapons. And so I think what folks see oftentimes, in particular with these police involved shootings or just the general violence that's seen as in America, is that it is a bit foreign to them, and even the way that we police, the way that we incarcerate. I mean, there are a lot of countries where, you know, incarceration does not look the same way it does here. It definitely is not happening in mass, and
Yeah, that's a
there's a
whole
bit that's a
that's a
whole
whole
other
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it does cause folks to kind of look our direction and be like, man, what's happening over there? Like, what's going on?
I don't know. Hopefully something, the momentum that the rest of the world is pushing for, hopefully that seeps in to the American bubble and causes
Yeah.
change. Um, I've been kind of wondering how long the protests will last. How long are we going to be able to sustain the level of passion that people are pushing for? You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
the last thing we want is for things to kind of fizzle out with time and
Right.
not really cause sustainable change, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. But I do think that it is also important for us to recognize and affirm the fact that there are different phases to the movement. And so one thing I'd say is, even if like the amount and scale of demonstrations begin to lessen, um, we should not necessarily assume that folks are not engaged. And so that's one thing I've tried to do, is to not be cynical, because at a certain point, there does need to be a transition in some areas of the country from the demonstration and the protest and the public, outcry, which is all very valid and which I support 1,000%. But at a certain point, it does need to transition into, okay, how are we strategizing? How are we organizing? How are we mobilizing? How are we shifting policy? How are we pushing for the change that we're seeking in these demonstrations? And that work being seen as just as valuable,
Right,
And
right.
so I think that that's what's really important, is that, if you aren't continuing to show up for marches, because the marches are still happening for sure. Um, I don't know that the media coverage is as strong as it was when the moment was really thick, but folks are still demonstrating. In particular, a lot of folks are raising their voice for Breonna Taylor, for sure, because again, that case continues to, you know, to just be heartbreaking.
Can you tell
There's of
us a little
course,
bit about that case? To be honest with you,
yeah,
I'm kind of fuzzy on the details of Breonna Taylor.
sure. So Breonna Taylor, this incident happened in Louisville, Kentucky. She was a former EMT worker who was getting ready to transition into another job, I believe I think it was UPS. And her and her boyfriend were asleep in their apartment. And there are four police officers, for context, all white male, and they were executing what's called a no-knock warrant. And what
Right.
a no-knock warrant is basically a warrant that a judge will give to, um, a police department that says that, because normally when you're executing a warrant in the States, you have to knock and you have to
Get
identify
permission.
yourself or
Yeah.
whatever to go in, even if you have a warrant. But a no-knock warrant just says that you can, you know, bust down the wall, or the door, without initially identifying yourself. But after you do break in, you are supposed to be identifying that you're the police, that kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So they were executing a warrant, and so, and this is also sort of corroborated by the accounts of neighbors, because this is an apartment building, and so folks that live near that apartment were essentially, sharing that, they just, and this is really, it's late. It's like, I think around midnight or 1 a.m. So, Brianna and her boyfriend were both sleeping, and they break into her apartment. don't identify themselves, and they just pretty much almost immediately start shooting and just like filling up the apartment with bullets.
Jeez.
The boyfriend actually thought that they were being, robbed or something, and so he had a licensed firearm that, because of the fact that he thought they were being robbed, he actually shot off a round and hit one of the officers in their leg.
Right.
And he somehow survived this whole ordeal.
The boyfriend?
The boyfriend survived, but
Okay.
Brianna got hit. I think it was like 8 or 9 times, essentially in her sleep. Like they just, filled her up with bullets. And initially, the boyfriend was being held on charges for attempted murder for the officer. But ultimately, and this will let you know that they understood how in the wrong they were. They actually ended up dropping all charges against him and releasing him. But the really even deeper tragedy in this whole story is the fact that the officers were at the wrong location. Because they were looking for drugs and weapons, and so they didn't find any drugs, and the only weapon that was there was the boyfriend's licensed firearm, which he was in possession of legally. So the drugs and weapons they were looking for, they did not find, because they were I think the location was actually like a mile and a half or 2 miles away from where they were. It may have even been more than that. And what's even worse is that the person that they were looking for was actually already in custody by another set of officers from the force, and they'd already confiscated all the drugs and weapons that that they had been looking for. So the whole thing was just completely unnecessary, completely uncalled for, and they pretty much failed in every measurable way in the scenario. And I think maybe one of the officers has been fired out of the 4 of them, but none of them have been arrested at this point.
So one of the first things that immediately come to my mind is there's a level of cowardice, right, that seems to come up. And of course, I'm in no way calling any police officer a coward. I'm aware that officers of the law are constantly risking their lives. But when you riddle an apartment with bullets before even executing, because the whole point of the no-knock warrant is you can come in, you can break down the door and come in and announce yourself as an officer of the law. You
Correct.
don't shoot up the apartment first, just in case, and then break down the door, right? And from what you're saying, it sounds like these guys are so afraid of actually coming in and being put in danger, which is a part of the job description, that they just shot up the entire place, killed people, and then decided to come in, right?
Yes, I mean, it's like this shoot first, ask questions later mentality. It's really bizarre, and so I think that's part of the broader discussion around policing in America. And to your point, it's not to try to indict every individual police officer and say that they're all incompetent, they're all racist, or they're all dangerous, but there clearly appears to be a pattern in practice of, number one, allowing folks in who should have never had that kind of power and responsibility, because I really do see being a police officer as, number one, you're empowering someone with the firearm and all these different interactions they have with the public. And there's also a higher duty of care that you should expect them to operate under, given that responsibility. And on top of that, because the discussion is oftentimes around, oh, well, there's just some bad apples here and there. But what we continue to see historically and even currently with Breonna Taylor's example is a really, the incident with Breonna Taylor is a really good example of this. You're not seeing these persons held accountable. And oftentimes, even if they are arrested and charged with a crime, oftentimes they're not even being convicted of those crimes. And a lot of times, even if they do get fired from that particular department, that does not preclude them from going a couple miles down the road to another county's department and being hired there. Like as was the case for someone, like Derek Chauvin, who had moved around a bit and, had these open police brutality incident reports against him, and none of them had ended up in any discipline, you know? And so there's no internal accountability. You're not seeing the kind of accountability from our criminal justice system when these things happen. And so I think that's what really continues to be the problem when you're seeing people calling for things like defunding the police, which really means reallocating resources to folks who have non-lethal solutions to problems that do not need lethal solutions. You know, folks are losing their lives over things that, are unnecessary. And that's the whole point. And so regardless of the fact of whether or not the majority of police officers, quote unquote, do good, whatever we would define that, it does not change the fact that the system continues to, there's this blue wall of silence that everyone talks about. And then what we also see is police officers who do try to do the right thing and are trying to turn in bad officers. There's a documentary that I'd encourage all of your listeners and viewers to check out called Crime and Punishment. It's on Hulu. And it talks about a group of officers in the NYPD, which has been notorious for this kind of behavior for years, whether it's stop and frisk, which finally was ruled as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, which was literally just racial profiling mandated by the mayor's office in New York. You had these officers in the NYPD that were blowing the whistle on continued racist targeting of citizens, and it shows how they were punished for that. How in some cases they were fired or reprimanded, or threats of physical harm, all for them wanting to do what we would think that they should do and turn in a bad apple. Because if it's just bad apples, then when that person's turned in, then the system should want that, right? The system should celebrate that. But what we've seen is that no, in reality, there's a penalty for turning those persons in and not keeping quiet. And so the message that's sent to folks who are coming into the force is, if you see something, don't say anything,
right,
because we take care of each other here. We don't sell each other out. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and I think that's an unavoidable tribal instinct, right? Whenever people in let's say a certain profession, let's say nurses or doctors or police, there's that sense of, okay, this is us. This is our community. Right. We have to watch out for each other. We can't let people find out about one of us that messed up, because the next time it could be you that messed up and you want us to look out for you. So, but how do you then turn around and say, no, your primary responsibility is to the people that you're serving? I feel that is a cultural shift that needs to be made. And I think it's going to take a while. I think it's going to take years of carefully scrutinizing the current officer training and making sure that changes are made in the training, in the frequency of training and workshops, to let people know that no, it's not okay to just look out for your friend before you look out for the people that you're serving.
Yeah, it really has to be upended the whole way that they approach that system, because I think many of the ways that it's being done in America it's just not salvageable, and it has to be scrapped. And I think we need to start from scratch, thinking through what law enforcement looks like in our country.
Yeah, man. And I'm going to ask you a question right now, which is a question that I know all Caribbean people think of whenever we hear about all the craziness happening in America and people being killed and all that. We often think, why not just leave? Just leave, And that's a question that naturally comes to us. But for me, after actually asking people this, because I've actually asked people this, the response I normally get is, it's not that simple, right? Because when this is all and this is, because Black people, Black Americans are American, you know, and
Yeah,
it's not so simple as just saying you're treated terribly here. Let's just leave and go somewhere else, because then the question is where you going, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you started answering it right there. I'll just sort of add to that. At the end of the day, um, as you just said, I'm a Black American, and my ancestors built this country for free, and in doing that, they envisioned a time where I and others who look like us um, would be in the position in this country to have some modicum of freedom, which we do, and to fight so that their legacy would be remembered and honored and appreciated. And that's a big part of even a lot of the pushes around Black Lives Matter, or the reinvigoration around holidays like Juneteenth and things of that nature. That's us as Black persons saying, we're going to tell our own story because America has not told it truthfully for centuries. Oh, and also, things like the 1619 Project, which I would encourage all your viewers to check out as well, which was put out by the New York Times Magazine, which
What's that?
chronicled, it was released in 2019. And so the 1619 Project commemorated 400 years from the date in 1619 when the first Africans were brought to these shores as slaves
Okay.
in Jamestown, Virginia. And so it's kind of wild to think about the fact that it's been 400 years, 1619 to 2019.
Yeah.
And they released it last year. And it was a powerful account of, number one, everything that's happened throughout that time. And there's a lot of guides and, you know, podcasts and things of that nature that helps you to digest the information. There's also materials for youth and young adults, both in K through 12 and college, to be able to disseminate it in a class setting. Um, I think what that legacy says to us is that, in spite of all that, we are here,
Right.
and we remain here. And there are some folks, like, for example, Marcus Garvey comes to mind, and there have been some folks in the Black nationalist movement who have advocated for, and I think in a certain period of time, Malcolm X talked about this as well, advocating, either as X would talk about, was sort of even a separate state for Black persons, and like a separate plot of land where we could be totally isolated among ourselves and not having to deal with the structure of racism and things of that nature. But
I,
then
I I
for
believe there is
Garvey,
a country in Africa though, which was initially settled through that method, right? I think it's Libya. Am I correct?
I don't, I'm not familiar with that. That may be true. I'm not familiar with the history there. But the
Yeah.
but the other but the other piece I was going to say is, folks like Garvey did have sort of a movement of saying we need to go back to the motherland and that sort of a thing. And so, and I think that there's some folks that, if there are a lot of people that are, connecting with their ancestry and things of that nature, and looking into their roots. And it's something that I've thought about doing as well. And I think if someone has the means and the desire and the connections in those spaces to say, hey, I want to go back and sort of start from scratch and reconnect with my heritage, by all means, I think people should feel free to do that. But I don't know if that necessarily in and of itself is the solution for everyone, for us to
Yeah.
just say in mass that we all just need to go back. Because number one, the majority of Black folks do not have the resources to do that. Um, I don't know necessarily that all the various African countries that, our ancestors are from necessarily, I don't know, I wouldn't say that there'd be hostility, but I don't know that they're advertising with open arms, hey, come back, or whatever, you know what I mean?
Well, I think the level of hostility is gradually decreasing. I think
Sure.
as there's a greater level of literacy and education on the African continent, governments are changing their policies and opening their arms to people who were displaced from the African continent. I know the Ghanaian government had a program. A lot of celebrities went there recently, and there was this whole thing that the Ghanaian government was doing for those celebrities. But as you said, it's not a very clear-cut,
Well,
straightforward
and here's my
solution.
question. I mean, I know you're St. Lucian, and we have lots of folks in the Caribbean. Are they going back?
Well, the thing is,
Because there's this mindset of, oh well, we have our island and this is ours now,
right,
and
right.
so but y'all, for you Black Americans, maybe you should go back. And it's like, well, you guys didn't leave your island.
Well,
You know what I
so
mean?
my thing is, as a Caribbean person, because of the experience that I felt growing up, where I never really felt out of place or racially discriminated against, even though we do have a huge problem of colorism in the
For sure,
Caribbean.
for
And
sure.
I think for Caribbean people, we kind of think like, oh, we're fine here. Why don't you just come here? Or you come
Yeah,
to one of the Caribbean islands.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
but going back to what you were saying about Marcus Garvey's vision for people migrating back to Africa, the reasoning, I believe, for him saying that was, we don't have the respect of other races.
Sure.
So he pointed to Asian people having certain achievements that are respected across the world, and Indian people as well. But because of slavery, because of oppression, and many factors that we could dive into, the people of African descent don't have the level of unity and the time as a race that we needed to build the accomplishments that we needed to secure the respect of the world. And his solution was a United States of Africa, I believe,
Yeah.
in so many words.
And yeah, and I vibe with what he's saying, but I think that at the end of the day, I think that's only that's a product of who's been able to tell the American story. Because I believe that if we were to frame the American story properly, then First Nations persons, Native Americans, and Black people in particular could be better seen as a huge part in the architecture of what it means for America to be this global superpower, because it was built on our backs,
Right,
you know,
right.
and it was, and beyond that, all the different ingenuity and inventions and things of that nature, which we would always learn about during Black History Month. And those lists are endless. I mean, in spite of the oppression, the amount of, ingenuity and brilliance and innovation that has been and continues to be produced by Black persons in this country, I'd put on par with any other people group. But the problem is we just haven't been able to tell that story. And so I understand, the lack of respect and things of that nature, and the disparate treatment that we often face is hard to deal with. But at the end of the day, I think that we have just as much, if not more, of a claim to this country as any majority culture person would. And at the end of the day, I think we really need to, as Black persons, reconnect in particular with our First Nations brothers and sisters, our Native American brothers and sisters who've really just been forgotten,
Right.
and who their genocide was the precursor to our enslavement, and the amount of genocide that we experienced as well. And we oftentimes don't tell that story. And I think if those stories, those non-dominant narratives were shared, that I think people would have a completely different picture of what it means to be Black or a Native American in America.
Absolutely, man. I've been hearing that more and more lately, that the Native American story needs to be remembered, needs to be addressed. And Black people kind of have some level of responsibility as be co-oppressed, so to speak,
Yeah.
to pull them up, because it's a really terrible story what's happening with or what has happened to the Native American population in the United States. I want to quickly segue because we're almost on the tail end of our time.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny to me how quickly the time passes.
It always.
But I want to know what you think about the seeming link between conservative Christianity and racism, right?
Mm.
I don't think it is an accident that a large part of Trump's vote was from, as they said in the news,
Evangelical
evangelicals.
Christians
Yeah.
are white.
Yep. Or I don't think it's an accident that a lot of conservative groups tend to be racist. What is the link between conservatism and racism? Why does that seemingly keep popping up?
It's a really good question. I think another thing, and I know I've dropped a few resources, but another book I would suggest to your viewers to check out is this book called The Color of Compromise, and it talks about the history of the American evangelical church's complicity with the structure of racism. And so it's written by a friend of mine named Jamar Tisby, and he actually walks through that really powerfully, historically, and all the way up to today. So I wouldn't be able to do that justice in these last couple of minutes. But what I will say as a preface to that is I do think that a lot of what you're talking about is wrapped up in the caricature of white Jesus. And we talked about this a bit last
we touched
episode.
on that. Yep.
Yeah. And, I think that American conservative, Christianity has bought into this idea of white superiority. And the biggest relic of that is this picture of white Jesus. We have adopted a savior that we believe needs to be superior or conqueror, powerful, and almost like a dictator mentality in some ways, so that if you shape yourself with this white savior, then every person that looks like that image that you have promoted and prompted and portrayed is even going to be subconsciously and unconsciously begin to assume that, okay, I'm superior, I'm better. And it's also been rooted in our theology. There's the whole garbage about, the descendants of Ham and how they're cursed, and how, Black persons are descendants of Ham and therefore they're cursed to be,
Right.
Inferior. There are these beliefs in, was it, I'm forgetting the term, but there's this whole, psychological and scientific framing around even like the different sizes of brains, and how the Black person's brains are smaller or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and that has been proven to be false, right?
It's all crap, yeah. And
I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, of course. And even prior to that, during the enslavement of Black persons in America, there was a lot of this unholy alliance with holiness, and this, these justifications for slavery that slaveholders would, skew the Bible to justify their bigotry and their hate. And I think that obviously is seen as America's original sin, I'd say, connected with the genocide of Native Americans. And from the very beginning, that was all tied up in these ideas around religion. Another thing I would tell your viewers to look up is there's this concept called the doctrine of discovery. This dates back to like the 1400s. And the doctrine of discovery is really the root of the way that European colonizers and settlers approached the ways that they tried to conquer different areas of the world historically. Essentially, the doctrine of discovery from that perspective was that, you know, when white persons discover a plot of land or an area, they can automatically acclaim ownership of that location, and they can do with it what they want, because of this divine right and this divine superiority of whiteness. They've been blessed to be superior, to conquer, to name it and claim it. You know what I mean? And there's some really sinister connections now to the prosperity gospel that even a lot of Black ministers will preach. This idea that because of the fact that we're connected to Christ and to this religious community, that I can see that house that I want and I can name it and claim it, and you know, it's already mine, and all this other foolishness. It's rooted in that doctrine of discovery that goes back centuries. You know, there's a good book on this called Unsettling Truths, written by Mark Charles, who's a Native American theologian, and Dr. Soong Chan Ra, who's Asian American theologian. They co-authored a book called Unsettling Truths, which talks about the doctrine of discovery and how it's disseminated itself through global Christianity, but definitely here in America. So the last quick thing that I'll share, because I think it's important for our context in the American story, is it was around 1687, the early governing body for the colonies, is, of course, we didn't become the United States until, you know, the late 1700s. In 1687, they had a governing body called the Virginia Assembly. And in order to be a member of the Virginia Assembly, number one, you had to be a white male, you couldn't be a woman, and you also had to be a member of the Anglican Church. So that was the major Christian denomination in the colonies at the time. Those were the two requirements. So at that time, what was happening was that you had, in particular, these Quaker missionaries that were evangelizing in the South, and some of the persons they were evangelizing were American slaves. And so you have these enslaved persons that are coming into the knowledge of these concepts around freedom and liberty and all this language around how we can be free, and the story of Exodus and how the people of Israel were set free from the Egyptians and things of that nature. And so what started happening were these enslaved persons that the Quakers are baptizing into this Christian faith are starting to try to apply in the court systems for their freedom on the basis of their divine right they felt they had as humans to be free, because we're a Christian nation, right? And I've come into the Christian faith, and so that should impart upon me freedom. So there's this conundrum, you know, they didn't know what to do in the court system. And so the Virginia Assembly, they actually passed a law. And if you read The Color of Compromise, Jamar actually, he maps out the exact language of the law within the book. But essentially the law
Tisby,
said,
right?
Jamar Tisby is his name. Yeah. And essentially what the law stated was that baptism would only impart upon the enslaved African freedom of your soul, but not freedom from your current physical bodily bondage. It basically, they said, was that only imparts freedom upon you in the great by and by, but that you still remain enslaved currently. And so they literally, as a connection to that, required from that point forward that to be included in the baptismal vows for enslaved Africans. And so when they were baptized into Christianity, they had to recite that I understand that my baptism is only for the future salvation of my soul. It has nothing to do with my current enslavement. So I'll share all that to share that this is deeply embedded, not just in the American story, but in the American Christian story. And that's continued throughout time. It's what allowed Christians to justify the system of slavery, to justify the system of Jim Crow, to justify segregation, to justify the war on drugs and mass incarceration's disproportionate effect on persons of color, to justify this anti-Black racism in the current Trump administration, and to justify saying all lives matter instead of Black lives matter. And that's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
And so until we face the reality of that deeply rooted racism that we've been complicit in, and that's why I think Jamar's book is just so powerful, The Color of Compromise. It's an amazing, you have to read it.
No, listen, I'm going to definitely put in, for anyone watching right now, you will be seeing the link for...
let me show you the cover of the book, too.
Yeah, we'll put in The Color of Compromise and Unsettling Truths. Jamar...
That's his name right there. Jamar Tisby. The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism. Have to read it.
And what about Unsettling Truths? Who's the guy on that?
Mark Charles. He's a Native American theologian. And then Dr. Soong Chang Ra. And that Soong is spelled Soong, Chan, Chan, Ra, R-A-H. Excuse me.
R-A-H, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so guys, if you're watching, we're definitely going to put in those links in the description of this episode, so that you can take a look. Yeah, man, I'm gonna check these out myself.
Sure.
I really appreciate the conversation with you, because there's a lot of things that you always share that I didn't know, and it's very educative. I wanted to, I don't know if we have time to mention this. Yeah, I'll probably have to touch base with you off the line about that.
Okay, sure.
But for those who are watching, thank you once again for joining us on another episode of Family Reflections. This will very likely be our last conversation on racism in the series. We've been talking about some serious stuff.
Sure. It's heavy.
Yeah, and I think we should just take a little pause from talking about really serious stuff. But definitely we'll be sharing all these resources, all these references. And once again, I'm taking this opportunity for anyone who's watching to remind you to do something wherever you are. Do the best you can with whatever you have to effect positive change in your part of the world. Mike, I have one last question for you right before we hop off the line.
Sure.
You are the VP of Diversity and Inclusion at Andrews University. I hope I didn't mess up the title.
No, you got it.
But how exactly do you do your job? I've been curious about that. How exactly do you execute? Because that sounds like such a broad, intense position.
Yeah, that's tough for a last question. That's a long answer for sure.
No, hey man,
I give the short version.
Yeah.
I think to your point, it's a really broad umbrella. There's a lot under it. Of course, race issues are a part of it, but there are lots of other things that we have to focus on. Gender equity and inclusion, LGBTQIA plus rights and inclusion. And the way that you do that and approach that in a Christian context is complex, but I think sometimes we make it more complex than it needs to be, because Jesus loves all people. And I think if we are a community that strives to model that love, then it isn't as complicated to do that as we may think. But that's maybe a whole other podcast. There's also, disability rights, and that's both visible and invisible disabilities and things of that nature. There's also conversations around, obviously health and wellness and things of that nature. There's a component of that that's connected to the conversation, religious diversity, and being able to be inclusive of folks who, in our context, are not Adventist Christians. Maybe they're Christians from another denomination, or maybe they're Muslim, maybe they're agnostic, atheist, Catholic, whatever their religious background may be, Hindu, Buddhist, things of that nature. Um, you know, what are the different complexities of that, and how do we uh, make their experience here welcoming and open? Of course, our international students and things of that nature, ensuring that they are valued and respected and connected. And so, I mean, there's a number of different ways that I try to approach that. I, of course, am one person, and
Right.
my office consists of me, and that's about it at this point. And we're a smaller campus, and you do the best you can with limited resources. But most of how I try to approach my job is being present, being available, and being transparent. Those are three things I try to do. I mean, there's the nuts and bolts of it. I report to our president. I serve on her cabinet. I serve on a number of committees within the institution. And so a lot of it is trying to inform and hold accountable our processes and within our structure. Work a lot with our students, on a consistent basis through our different clubs and activities, our AUSA, BSCF, Aula, Adelante, CASA, AFIA, SASA. Then we have our Caribbean club, our Haitian club, our African clubs, we even have an anime club on campus now.
Oh, okay.
I try to, shout them out when I can.
Right.
Then you have different departments and stuff. You try to stay connected with departments, talk with them about different curriculum conversations. Because I think the curriculum that our students have is a really important piece of this. You spend the majority of time in your classroom. So there are a couple different curriculum initiatives that I'm a part of. We're also in the area of anti-racism work, developing what's called a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus Center, which is a national, movement and initiative that Andrews has become a part of. We're the only Christian institution that's a part of that right now. It includes universities like Duke, Brown, University of Hawaii, the Citadel Military College, and a number of others. And so we're excited about doing that work on our campus as well, probably among 20 to 30 other things. But yeah, man, we keep
Sounds
busy.
like you're busy, man.
Yeah, very busy, but God is good. And we just try to, take it as it comes. I mean, I've tried to strive, obviously, to do as much as I can on those variety of different issues. It's definitely not perfect.
Right.
But we just try to be, again, like I said, present, available, and authentic / transparent. Those are really the metrics of what I'm trying to be on our campus.
All right. Yeah, well, definitely I encourage you to keep working because it sounds like there's a lot of good that you're working on. There's a lot of ways that you're affecting change in the Andrews University institution. Once again, folks, I can't say it enough. Wherever you are, do as much as you can to ensure that we come out of this season with more change in a positive direction. Thanks again for joining us, and have a good one.
Here.